Well, I can confidently say that I was not expecting to make another video like this so quickly after the last one. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I made a Linux video a little while ago, and I was talking about my experience trying to use Linux as a drop-in replacement for my Mac Studio when it came to day-to-day tasks while occasionally having to edit videos. And I had a lot to say about Linux and a lot to say about the community. And I know that I was kind of generalizing with the community, which is why today I'm not going to talk specifically about the community, but instead I want to talk about the 10 things that I actually really liked about using Linux. And if you want to know my experience when I tried it, you can check it out over there, but I have a lot to say, so let's dive in. And for starters, before I get to the list, I just want to say that while I said in the previous video that it had been 10 years since I tried Linux, that was true in the sense that I have not used it as my day-to-day desktop environment in about a decade. However, I'm not unfamiliar with Linux. I have used it as a network administrator for quite a few years, and when I was doing that, I got very familiar with a lot of different features and functions and really saw the benefits of it in certain instances. So that's where my background comes from. And trying it out recently did kind of open my eyes to some stuff, and I'm not going to lie, it's possible that I may try it again, not as a replacement for my Mac Studio. That workflow is set. However, I might try it again for virtual machines or maybe even as a server. But for now, let's dive into the list. Starting off at number 10 was the extremely fast and simple install. And this was super beneficial because, especially once I started really running into some issues with DaVinci Resolve, which was the last thing that I really needed to work on these things, I was able to distro hop like it was nothing. And it took me maybe 20 or 30 minutes to completely reassemble everything else I had from a previous distro into the new one. So the fact that you can simply put a full install onto a flash drive, plug it in, boot up into a live install experience where you can actually interact with the operating system directly off a flash drive, and then have it installed and ready to go in a matter of minutes is incredible. And this is super useful for general users who, like I was doing, tend to distro hop a lot, but it's also extremely beneficial for server distributions. If you're trying to deploy a server and you need to get the operating system onto it as quick as possible, it's pretty straightforward and easy to do. Now at number 9 is something I kind of mentioned at number 10, which is the installs aside from the operating system itself, specifically installs for drivers and updates. And this is super nice because when it came to the drivers, they were already there. They were ready to roll. I didn't have to do anything extra. And if I wanted third-party drivers, I could get them, but everything pretty much worked right out of the box. My network card, my graphics card, CPU, RAM, every little bit that I had plugged in, including audio drivers, which in Windows for me have always been notoriously difficult, were just ready to go. So that was an extremely nice benefit. Alongside the drivers, the actual updates for the operating system were almost seamless. There were a few instances where the system needed to reboot, but for most updates, it didn't have to reboot, courtesy of Linux running a live kernel. And this is super nice because this allows you to essentially let things go in the background while focusing on other tasks in the operating system. And you don't even have to run a full OS update if you don't want to, meaning that if one version of Linux is extremely stable with your hardware and the next version up isn't, you can stick with that older version for as long as you want, potentially until the next version of Linux allows for better stability with your existing hardware. That is extremely nice and very not Windows, where you are basically forced to update at some point, or you'll just never not have those prompts when you go to restart. At number 8 is something that originally drove me from Windows to macOS, which is privacy. And while you can say what you want about Apple and their privacy policies, they're still better than Windows or Google, but nothing is better than Linux. And you can't get any simpler or better than having one general privacy option during the install process saying, hey, can we connect to the web and send your app data back and forth or not? And if you uncheck it, it's off. And if you don't trust it, Linux is open source. Dive in, take a look, see what it's doing. I really like that. Now moving on to number 7, I love the fact that Linux is extremely lightweight and stable. The stability is super nice because when I used to do network administration tasks, you could fully deploy a system running Linux and pretty much trust that it was not going to have any sort of software issues, and you were more likely to end up dealing with hardware issues down the road before you ran into software issues. That's why even companies like Microsoft use Linux for their Azure cloud system, because it's just so stable that you can reliably keep it online for a very long period of time with no issues. And the lightweight nature means that not only could I take a system that was running 4th gen hardware and an extremely old GPU and have it run like it was nothing, in fact, have it run extraordinarily well due to the low overheads, but after I did the video and consequently kind of stepped away from Linux for a bit, I came back briefly to install it on this little guy with a dual-core Celeron, I think, 2 gigs of RAM, and a very minuscule 32 gigabytes of storage. This originally shipped with Windows 8, and it wasn't great then. It ran Linux Mint like it was nothing, courtesy of the extremely low overheads because of Linux's general lightweight nature. It is fantastic. So if you ever want to sort of breathe life into a new system, or even have a slightly older system feel like it is way newer than it should be, Linux is the go, and I love it for that. Now, at number 6, we have the fluid and intuitive interfaces. Now, I know you can change the interfaces to whatever you want. We'll get there in a minute. But overall, when I would boot up into any distro that I would choose while distro hopping, I was not ever in a point where I felt like I didn't know what I was looking at, with the exception of something like potentially Arch, which is why I didn't play with Arch. But when I would hop into a new distro, I knew what I was looking at pretty much right away, and it was very easy to find what I was looking for. And courtesy of number 7, the lightweight nature of the OS, it was an extremely fluid and very smooth overall experience. You could open windows and animations ran just fine. Even things like video watching rather, on something like YouTube, which I've seen other older systems struggle at, it was no issue, even on the really, really crappy little Dell box. So even if you're not going to go and customize the interface to something that is more tailored to exactly what you want, the default interfaces are extremely nice, and even the basic customizations allow for more than enough personalization for most general users. But at number 5, if you're not happy with any of the interface options that were provided by the distro of your choice, you can customize it. A lot. I mean, you can use GNOME, Cinnamon, no GUI if you're feeling like a psychopath. The options are basically limitless, and you can even create your own interface if you want. It's really cool, and it means that you can have a Windows lookalike, a Mac lookalike, something that has never been seen before, and anything in between. It's so cool. And while there are tons of options for customizing your interface, at number 4, we also have tons of distributions that you can choose from. Like I said at number 10, I distro hopped around a lot, and I was spoiled for choice. And that's a really good thing, because choice is one of the best things that you can have when actually picking an interface, an operating system, and a feature set for the computer and generally your overall user experience. Whether you want to go with the safe choice of Ubuntu, you feel a little more experimental and want to use Mint, or you want something that a lot of people have put a lot of time into and you could potentially buy hardware for, like Pop! OS, those are all options. Or if you really want to dive in and go crazy with it, you can do things like Manjaro, or just go straight to the source and go with Arch or Fedora. There's a ton of options, and that's a good thing. And once you've settled in on your distro of choice, you can then go and get a ton of apps with number 3, the app management tools and the App Store. I loved the fact that once I booted up into any of the distros that I chose, there was an app store with a full interface that allowed me to go in and pull things that I'm super familiar with, like Handbrake or OBS. But in the instance that there are more in-depth things that you want to pull that aren't in the actual app store with an interface, you can always use the actual packet manager like Pacman or apt-get or RPM, and these are done through the terminal and allow you to pull from a repository. That's really nice, and means that even if you don't see it in the App Store, doesn't mean it's not available. You might just have to figure out which apt-get command it is. And speaking of the terminal, that's number 2, the terminal. I mentioned in my previous video that I'm kind of familiar with the terminal courtesy of my background using macOS, but I know that there are differences, and the fact that you can really dive into a lot of things with this actual terminal means that it is a significantly more powerful tool than whatever the heck Windows installs, and even more powerful in a lot of cases than the terminal available on macOS. And for the real power users, this also means that you can pretty much navigate the interface and complete tasks with little to no input from your mouse. It's a meme at this point to see the people installing their web browser and seeing code flying all over the screen, but while it might be kind of true for some users, it's also maybe just a nice thing to have if you really want to just get something done and don't want to have to navigate an interface to do it. or rather a graphical interface. Either way, the terminal is really cool. And last but not least, and number one is what it was always going to be. It's free. Yes, it was always going to be number one, because whether you want to start something up like a full server and deploy it and have it run for years on end and have Linux manage it, or whether you want to dive in and just experiment around with it, or anything in between, it's free, no cost of entry. So there's no skin off your back for not liking it or loving it. In fact, if you don't like it, you haven't lost any money. And if you do love it, you haven't spent anything to gain this fantastic experience. It's just a win-win across the board. And I know it's kind of cliche at this point, and yes, I know there are instances of Linux that do cost money, but for the general user, even up to folks who just want to have something that is a basic install to manage a server, and again, anything in between, most of those operating systems can do exactly what you want at no cost to you, aside from time, research, and experience. Those are three things that, well, any operating system takes to use. And well, yeah, those are the 10 things that I like about Linux. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you want to be part of the conversation. You all had a lot of comments to leave in the last video, both helpful and hurtful, but I look forward to your comments in this video as well. Also, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of video. I got a lot more stuff coming out. I'm going to talk about whether the Switch Lite is still worth buying in 2022. I'm going to talk about the iPad in a bit, and potentially turning my phone into a Nintendo Switch. Kind of. All those videos are coming out soon. So please make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there, and have a good one.